What's up, dudes? Welcome back to another video of Cristiano stuff. Today we are walking again. It's pretty nice outside. And we are going to be talking about my election prediction. I'm still defending the final EC vote and the Senate, which I believe was 313. But people brought some clear things up that I think is important, and that is that my coverage was very much poll heavy and didn't focus on certain issues that voters are increasingly caring about, or why Trump is going to win. Rather, I only focused on what the polls say and believed the polls in saying that Trump would win. So let's talk about that. And why I think that Trump will win in the fashion that I predicted, which is pretty profound. First, I think that a large amount of it has to do with minority votes shifting. A noteworthy category would be African Americans, who historically have voted for Trump like 8%, less than 20, sometimes around more than 10. It's not good for Trump, is the point with African American voters. However, this is starting to shift. A lot of younger African American voters have become more favorable, or have started to favor Trump more than they had historically. And so we're seeing that Trump, when polling with African American voters specifically, is now at 18%. Now, I'm not completely sure why this is, but other data suggests that this is a long time coming. If you look at voting trends amongst people who identify with certain ideologies, conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever it may be, only a minority of African Americans identify as conservative actually voted Republican. A majority voted Democrat. And so, even a group typically associated with the Republican Party isn't voting for the Republican Party. Why is that? I have no clue. But we are seeing a significant increase, regardless, in the Republican vote share amongst African Americans. In another trend that has been ongoing for much longer, however, is beginning to slow down, I think, still going, but a little slower, would be the increase in vote share amongst Hispanic voters. A large part of this has to do with social policy, because when it comes to economic issues, Hispanic voters tend to be a little more left-wing than the average vote in the United States. However, on social and cultural issues, they're generally very conservative. We've seen in Florida how massive a shift in the state has seen, specifically due to the large Hispanic population. And while Florida is not going to be a swing state, we know it's going to go Republican, or at least pretty positive. You know, if Biden pulled off a miracle, he could, theoretically speaking, win Florida. But that's not going to happen. So we have to view it from another angle, I guess, and look at other states where Hispanic voters are shifting. Texas has seen major shifts. Same deal as Florida, though. We're not going to see that state be a swing state. But in general, you're seeing shifts amongst Hispanic voters. And I think that that's one large reason why Nevada will stay Republican. It's because of the Hispanic vote shift. It was very close in 2020. In fact, most of the swing states were very, very close in 2020. Closer than usual. But we saw that Hispanic voters, assuming they shifted more, would change the state of Nevada to the Republican Party. And Trump is doing better than he was in 2020 in the polls. So what is to say that he's not going to do better, especially with the demographic that is major in a state, a swing state, where he's seeing increased vote counts in almost definitively. Like, it is pretty hard to deny the fact that Trump is seeing an increased vote share amongst Hispanic voters. So Trump is looking good in Nevada. The African American vote share is making it to where Georgia is almost a given, which is kind of wild to say. I forget how I predicted it. I think I might have gone tilt, but that's because of the massive suburban shifts that we've seen in Atlanta to the Democrats. The African American vote share, though, is really counteracting that heavily. That's why it's polling so strongly for Trump. Like, it was +8, and I was like, that's definitely not going to happen, but Trump will win. So we are seeing that demographic shifts amongst minorities, at least regarding how they vote, has definitely benefited the Trump administration. And if we look at important issues as well that are kind of hurting Biden, it'll help us predict what might happen in states like Michigan and Arizona. Arizona, of course, is due to border security, and this also might impact Nevada as well. Republicans are favored by 30% by the American vote base based on trust to secure the border. The Biden administration is regarded by many to have failed that. They have pulled back on many Trump-era regulations, and many people have seen or heard about what is happening at the border, and they find there to be many issues with it. There's been a significant rise in reported crossings during the Biden administration, and events like Lake and Riley tend to galvanize voters in favor of wanting to secure the border more than Biden has, and that's why we're seeing a 30% discrepancy between trust to secure the border. And if that issue is so polarizing in favor of the Republicans, but also becoming more important to voters, you can see how that might harm Biden's opportunity to win. And it has been harming Biden's opportunity to win. And then another issue is foreign policy. Biden has 3 distinct failures in the eyes of many voters, but the last one, I think, is the one that's going to cost him Michigan the most, or is most likely to cost him Michigan. So failure in Afghanistan was one thing regarded as a failure. His immense funding to Ukraine, which lots of people on the left and many in the center right even support. However, those in the center generally vote less often, and it's kind of difficult to galvanize that voter base. However, it's very easy to galvanize a radical voter base, which providing aid to Ukraine is doing for the Republicans, especially Trump, who seems to be opposed to aid to Ukraine. But then also you have the Israel-Palestine conflict, and support for Israel, while being relatively strong, especially amongst the right, is weak amongst the left. And so Biden's pro-Israel stance has harmed him, especially with the large Arabic and generally Muslim. There's not just Arabs, but there's other Muslim ethnic groups in the state of Michigan that make up a large percent of Detroit's population, the Detroit metro area, and to a lesser extent the state as a whole. It's one of the larger minorities which would seem unexpected, but is the case nonetheless. So these voters who reliably vote Democrat usually, for example, the mayor of Hamtramck, which is a city basically in the center of Detroit. It's almost like a city surrounded by the city of Detroit. But the mayor of Hamtramck is a Democrat. The entire city council are Democrats. However, they're also all Arab. And the mayor had made a comment regarding Biden's policy regarding Israel-Palestine, saying that he is opposed to it, and that it's likely lost Biden a voter, at least in his case. But there's also many others who share the sentiments of this very much popular mayor. So if we take the whole Arab population of Detroit metropolitan area, you get around 80,000, if I'm not mistaken. And seeing as Detroit went by less than 100,000 in 2020, it does not take much for those people to vote in large droves for Trump, especially if they had voted for Biden before. So I don't know the exact figures, but we'll make up some numbers. Let's say 30,000 of them voted for Biden in 2020, and 7,000 of them voted for Trump in 2020. These are about the ratios that we see amongst Arab voters, or had been seeing amongst Arab voters and Muslim voters. And I think this is going to change significantly. I think that Trump will get a majority. It might also result in lower turnout, just because people are going to abandon Biden but not flip sides to Trump. So instead of getting 37,000 votes in the state of Michigan, you can assume that Biden might get around 10,000 and Trump will get 20,000. But that's still a gain of 13,000 and a loss of 20,000 for Biden. That closes half the gap. I believe Michigan went by around 70,000, 80,000 votes in 2020. I could be incorrect about that, though, so do fact check me. But that takes half of that out. And you can imagine that a marginal swing amongst the remainder of the state's voters, which we do see indicated by polling, could totally change the tide of that. And in general, even outside of the Arab population, we just see that amongst Arabs or Muslims in general, that it's going to be more radical change. But left-wing individuals, especially to the further left, who never liked Biden much anyways, are going to like him even less. And they're definitely not going to vote for Trump, but they will turn out even less than they had previously because of how they feel about Biden's foreign policy. Of course, Ukraine is a success amongst his base. Afghanistan is a success in the eyes of basically nobody. However, Trump should take some blame for that. I think that that's something that Americans tend to forget. Unless you're like Rachel Maddow or something like that from MSNBC, maybe a few of them do realize that Trump should take some of the blame, and I'm sure they like to talk about it. I don't watch MSNBC, so couldn't tell you. But still, that is what's happening. Lots of people are mad at Biden's foreign policy. Now, I want to address something that I didn't address in the previous video, some redeeming qualities that could save Biden. And the first one, which is very recent news, is the U.S. proposed a motion to the Security Council to call for a 6-week ceasefire in order for the exchange of hostages from Hamas to Israel and vice versa, if that is something that Israel's open to, I guess. And I guess Hamas has to be open to giving hostages back as well. And then also to help get aid to people in Gaza, because I'm not sure if y'all know the current status of the Israel-Palestine war, but the people who had lived in Gaza, which is around 2 million or so, are basically squeezed into about a quarter of the entire region of Gaza. Around 31,000, I believe, is the number at the moment, have died in Gaza. That's confirmed deaths, compared to the around 1,200, I believe, Israeli deaths. So it's been more detrimental for those in Gaza. The U.S. is starting to recognize this on a foreign policy perspective, and I think Biden knows that that's going to help him when it comes to vote share. But still, he is on the wrong footing on that issue, and starting off wrong means that it's going to be harder for him to convince voters to come back. And then the other issue that I think is redeeming for Biden's chances is the economy. Economic perception is a whole lot worse than the economy itself actually is. And so if economic perception were to improve, then you could imagine the same would go for Biden's results in polling. And obviously when the actual election comes, his results in the election. So it's not all doom and gloom for Biden. However, I do think that for the most part, what I predicted will stay. The nice thing too about Biden is that lowering interest rates, which he might end up doing very soon as inflation has come down, could help him. The stock market recently took a dent after the Fed decisively decided not to lower interest rates. But if they were to lower interest rates, which coming upon summer and fall would be a perfect time to do it, it'll cause a surge, albeit minor, to Biden's chances. I still think Trump will win. I'm going to defend my 313 prediction. However, I could easily see it not being 313 and being less. States like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, especially with the down ballot presence of Bob Casey, who I'm certain will win the Senate election in Pennsylvania, do make it hard for Trump in those states. Wisconsin has been relatively interesting politically. They've been opposed to conservative judges, and it's a state where you would think the Republicans are doing better, almost like Iowa, until Iowa did actually start to shift to the Republicans, and we now see it generally vote likely regarding margins, so between 5 and 10, or some people say 5 and 15. Why is that not happening in Wisconsin? I don't know. Madison and Milwaukee do kind of make more sense to me. They're large, very much liberal cities, especially Madison with its University of Wisconsin collegiate population. But I can understand why people might think Republicans would do better in Wisconsin. And would not be surprised if Wisconsin still does go in favor of the Republicans. But since it is oddly liberal, in my opinion, I do think that you could still definitely see it not go Republican. That could be one of those switches. Otherwise, I'm pretty much locking in my swing state predictions: Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada. I think those are essentially locks. You can also say North Carolina, though that's also a lock, in my opinion. It kind of has the same thing in Georgia with the African American vote share shifting right. You see the state shift much further right as well. And Trump won it in 2020. If Georgia, a relatively similar state that voted slightly more Democrat, is going to shift to a definitive Republican based on what I had already brought up, the factors I had already brought up, then why wouldn't the same happen in North Carolina? I think North Carolina might even be more likely than Georgia. Some analysts would obviously disagree. But still, North Carolina, I think, is a lock in my book. So if we had Trump at 313, but we took Pennsylvania as 19, so he's at 294, and we took Wisconsin, which is 10. That's 284. Still a win. So regardless, I think Trump wins. But I do think that there is reason to believe that it could be closer, depending on how these last few months of Biden policy work out for Biden, and how, I don't think that overall shifts with demographics are going to cause much of a difference, except for in the more niche demographics that, as I stated with foreign policy, have become quite irritated. So unless we see another niche pull out with some extreme support for Trump, I don't think that there will be any predictions in the maybe Biden column for me. I'm still going to keep Wisconsin tilt in Pennsylvania tilt, but anything could happen. It's very possible that something else does result. Thank you for watching. I apologize for my relatively narrow-minded approach to the previous election prediction. I hope you enjoyed this one and enjoyed the lovely weather around me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all all later. Bye-bye.